Some men are built like mountains. And mountains, Lenora had learned, don't fall easy. When she first spotted the figure moving through the blizzard toward her cabin, she knew two things immediately. Whoever it was shouldn't be alive in this cold. And they were far too large to be anyone she'd ever met. The shape staggered, caught itself, staggered again. By the time she could make out the traditional bone chest piece and long black hair whipping in the wind, her hand was already on the rifle by the door. What she didn't know was that in less than an hour, she'd be tearing that door apart with her bare hands. The storm had been building for 3 days. Lenora Hartwell stood inside her cabin, watching through the frosted window, as the massive figure collapsed to one knee in the snow, then forced itself upright again. The movement was wrong, too slow, too desperate. She'd seen wounded animals move like that, right before they stopped moving altogether. Her fingers tightened on the rifle stock, but she didn't lift it. Not yet. The figure was close enough now that she could see the beaded work on his clothing. The way his shoulders were broader than the doorframe of her woodshed. He had to be at least a foot taller than any man she'd known, maybe more. When he raised his head, she saw his face clearly for the first time. Apache, young despite the weathered skin. And his eyes, they weren't focused on her cabin with threat or malice. They were focused on it with the last shreds of hope. He took another step. His knee buckled. This time, he didn't get back up right away. Lenora's breath caught. She'd built this cabin small on purpose. After losing Marcus, after watching the wagon train survivors scatter to larger settlements, she'd chosen this isolated spot deliberately. The door was narrow, the windows few, the whole structure designed to feel safe, protected. She'd made it small enough that she'd never have to share it with anyone who made her feel small. The man in the snow was trying to crawl now. She watched his fingers dig into the packed ice, pulling his enormous frame forward inches at a time. Blood left a thin trail behind him, barely visible against the white. Her mind calculated distance. He was maybe 20 feet from her porch. The wind was picking up, visibility dropping fast. In another hour, she wouldn't be able to see 10 feet past her own walls. He'd be dead by then. Lenora pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, her breath fogging the pain. The rifle felt heavy. Her late husband's voice echoed in her memory, the last words he'd spoken before the fever took him. Don't let this place make you hard. She'd promised him she wouldn't. But Marcus had died anyway, and promises to dead men felt like stones you carried for no reason except guilt. The Apache collapsed completely, face down in the snow. She moved before she decided to move, throwing open the door and letting the brutal cold slam into her. The wind stole her breath, but she forced her legs forward, boots crunching through snow that was already past her ankles. Up close, he was even more massive than she'd thought. His back was nearly as wide as her kitchen table. She grabbed his shoulder and pulled, trying to roll him over. He didn't budge. Get up, she said, her voice swallowed by the howling storm. She tried again, throwing her full weight into it. This time his body shifted slightly, enough that she could see his face. His eyes were half open, glazed with fever. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Lenora hooked her arms under his and pulled. He was impossibly heavy, like trying to drag a felled tree. Her boots slipped on the ice, but she kept pulling, kept dragging him inch by terrible inch toward the cabin. When they reached the porch steps, she had to stop, gasping, her shoulders screaming. The door stood open behind her, warm firelight spilling out into the storm. She looked at the doorway, then at him, then back at the doorway. He'd never fit. The frame was barely wide enough for her to pass through comfortably with firewood in her arms. His shoulders alone would wedge solid in that space. She stared at the problem, her mind racing through impossible solutions. Behind her, the man made a sound low, broken, barely human. His hand lifted slightly from the porch, reaching toward the light, before falling limp. "You're too big for my door," Lenora whispered. The words hung in the freezing air between them. She watched his chest rise and fall, each breath more shallow than the last. The storm shrieked around them, snow already starting to bury his legs. Her cabin stood there, small and safe and perfectly built to keep the world out. And this man was dying because of it. Lenora straightened. She looked at the door frame, then at the tool shed where Marcus's old axe hung. Her hands were already numb from the cold. When she moved toward the shed, she wasn't thinking about promises anymore. She was thinking about the sound of splintering wood, and how some barriers were meant to be broken. The Apache's eyes closed. His breathing stopped fighting the wind. The axe felt lighter than it should have. Lenora hefted Marcus's old splitting tool, its blade still sharp from the last time she'd used it to cut firewood. The wind screamed at her back as she positioned herself in front of the door frame, the cabin's warmth bleeding out into the storm with every passing second. On the porch behind her, the Apache's chest barely rose. She had minutes, maybe less. The first swing bit deep into the wood. The sound was satisfying and terrible at once, the crack of something permanent breaking. Splinters flew. She swung again, aiming for the left side of the frame where the wood was oldest. Another crack. Another chunk of her carefully built isolation falling away. Her arms burned. The cold made every movement harder. But she kept swinging. She had to make the opening wider by at least 8 inches on each side. Maybe more. She hadn't measured him. Just knew that what she'd built to keep herself safe was now the thing killing him. 4 swings. 5. 6. The frame began to give way, the entire structure groaning as she destroyed its support. She didn't care. Let it all come down if it meant saving a life. The left side finally broke free, hanging at an angle. She moved to the right side, swinging with everything she had left. Her shoulders screamed. Her hands were so numb she could barely feel the axe handle. But the wood kept splintering, kept giving way, until finally the right side cracked and the entire doorframe sagged inward. Lenora threw the axe aside and stumbled back to where the Apache lay. Snow had already begun to cover him, white against the beaded tan of his clothing. She grabbed him under the arms again and pulled. This time she had purpose, had direction. She dragged him across the porch, his weight somehow even heavier now that her strength was nearly gone. The ruined doorway loomed ahead, his shoulders caught on what remained of the frame. She pulled harder, angling his body, using her legs to push against the porch railing. Something in the wood gave way with a groan, and suddenly he was sliding through, his massive frame finally fitting through the space she'd carved out with desperation and an axe. She pulled him all the way inside, his boots leaving tracks of melting snow and blood across her clean floor. The wind roared through the broken doorway. Lenora slammed what remained of the door shut, but it hung crooked, gaps letting in the cold. She grabbed blankets from her bed, stuffing them into the spaces, blocking what she could. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would have to do. When she finally turned to look at him, really look at him, her breath caught. His chest piece was cracked, one of the bone decorations broken. Beneath it, his shirt was soaked through with blood on his left side, fresh blood still flowing. The fever flush on his face made his skin look like heated copper. His breathing was rapid, shallow. She knelt beside him, her hands hovering over the wound, unsure where to even begin. His eyes opened. For a moment, they focused on her face. His lips moved, shaping words she couldn't hear. Then, his body convulsed, back arching off the floor, and Lenora realized the blood and fever weren't her biggest problems. Whatever was wrong with him was about to get much worse. Lenora had watched Marcus die of fever. She knew the signs, the shivers that came in waves, the way the body fought itself until it had nothing left to fight with. This was different. The Apache's convulsion lasted only seconds, but when it passed, his skin was burning to the touch. She pressed her palm to his forehead and pulled back immediately. No person should be this hot and still breathing. She grabbed her sewing scissors and cut away the blood-soaked shirt, exposing the wound. A gash ran from his ribs to his hip, deep but clean. Too clean. This wasn't from a blade or a bullet. The edges were perfectly straight, almost surgical. She'd seen animal attacks, seen what knives and broken bone could do to flesh. This was something else entirely. "What happened to you?" she whispered, grabbing clean cloth from her cupboard. She pressed it against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. He didn't flinch. His eyes were moving beneath closed lids, his head turning side to side. His lips moved again, words forming in a language she didn't understand. Then, suddenly, in English, "They followed the markers." His voice was thick with fever. "All of them. Followed them right to—" He broke off with a gasp, his hand reaching up to grab her wrist with surprising strength. Lenora froze. His eyes were open but unseeing, staring past her at something only he could witness. His grip tightened. "The children first," he continued, his voice breaking. "They took the children first." His hand dropped away, fingers curling against the floor. "I tried to stop them. Tried to—" Another convulsion shook him. When it passed, tears were sliding down his temples into his hair. She worked quickly, wrapping the wound with strips of cloth torn from her oldest dress. The bleeding was slowing, but the fever worried her more. She'd seen fever kill faster than any wound. She needed to cool him down, needed to bring his temperature back to something a human body could survive. The problem was his size. She had one blanket, one small tub for washing, and a man who weighed more than she could lift. "Stay with me," she said, more to herself than to him. She filled her washing basin with snow from outside the ruined doorway, brought it to the fire to take the worst edge of cold off, then used her remaining clean rags to wipe his face, his neck, his arms. The water turned pink almost immediately. He muttered something else. A name, maybe. Then, the markers. They knew where to look. His eyes fixed on her suddenly, focused with an intensity that made her lean back. "You have to burn them. All of them. Before they come back." "Who?" Lenora asked. "Who's coming back?" But his eyes were already losing focus again, rolling back. His breathing became labored, each inhale sounding wet and wrong. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening past the rapid heartbeat. There was fluid in his lungs. The fever was winning. Outside, the storm reached a new level of fury. The blankets she'd stuffed in the broken doorway started to pull free, letting in gusts of snow. Inside, the fire crackled, struggling against the cold. And on her floor, surrounded by bloody rags and melting snow, a man 3 times her size was dying despite everything she'd done. His hand moved suddenly, reaching for something at his belt. A small pouch, intricately beaded. His fingers closed around it, then relaxed. The pouch rolled free, falling open. Something small and white tumbled out onto the floor between them. Lenora picked it up, turning it toward the firelight. Her stomach dropped. It was a tooth. Small. Definitely human. Definitely from a child. Lenora stared at the tiny tooth resting in her palm. It was small, perfectly white, the kind that belonged to someone no older than 7 or 8. Her mind raced through explanations. A keepsake from his own child, a trophy from an enemy, a reminder of someone lost. None of the possibilities were good, but some were worse than others. She set it carefully on the table and turned back to Nako. His breathing had grown more labored, each inhale rattling in his chest. She needed to focus on keeping him alive long enough to demand answers. The wound was wrapped, but the fever was climbing. She could feel the heat radiating off him from 2 feet away. Lenora grabbed more snow from outside, this time not bothering to warm it. She packed it directly against his neck, his wrists, anywhere she could find a pulse point. He jerked at the contact but didn't wake. The snow melted almost instantly against his skin, running in streams across the floor to mix with the blood. "Talk to me," she said quietly, wringing out another rag. "Tell me what happened to you." As if responding to her command, his eyes snapped open. But they weren't seeing her. They were seeing something else entirely, something that made his whole body go rigid. "The settlement," he gasped. 3 days' ride from the winter camp. They'd been there 2 months. Maybe 3. His hand reached up, grabbing at air. "We brought supplies, blankets, food. We were trying to—" He broke off, his face contorting. The smoke was still rising when we got there. Lenora kept her hands moving, kept applying the cold cloth, but she was listening now. Really listening. 14 families, he continued, his voice cracking. 23 children. They'd marked the settlement with posts. Red cloth tied at the top. Said it was for trade routes. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh or a sob. They weren't trade markers. They were targets. His hand found her wrist again, gripping with desperate strength. The children were already gone. Taken. The adults. He couldn't finish. His head turned to the side and she saw tears cutting through the dirt and fever flush on his face. "I found him in what used to be his home. Just him. Everyone else burned. The tooth." Lenora's eyes went to the table where it sat, suddenly understanding. Not a trophy, not a keepsake from his own family. It was the last physical proof that a specific child had existed at all. "You saved him," she said softly. "The child. You got him out." Nako's grip tightened. "For 2 days. I kept him alive for 2 days." His eyes closed. "Then they found us." "Who found you?" "The ones who set the markers. The ones who knew exactly where to look." His breathing hitched. "They wanted the boy. Wanted to finish what they started. I fought them." He gestured weakly toward his wound. "One of them had a cavalry saber. Clean. Sharp. He knew how to use it." Lenora felt her stomach turn. She'd seen cavalry blades before. They left exactly the kind of wound Nako carried. "Where's the boy now?" Nako's eyes opened, focusing on her with terrible clarity. "I got him to the mission church 20 miles north, left him with the priest. Then I started running, thought I could lead them away from him." He coughed, the sound wet and thick. "Thought I could outrun men on horses. I'm bigger than anyone I know, and I thought that made me stronger than basic sense." The storm outside reached a new pitch. The makeshift blanket door covering blew inward, and Lenora had to stop treating him long enough to shove it back into place. When she returned, Nako's eyes were closed again, but his breathing had changed. Faster, shallower. "Don't you die on me," she said, pressing both hands against his chest. "Not after I tore my door apart for you." His lips moved. She leaned closer to hear. "They saw me come this direction," he whispered. "When the storm breaks, they'll come looking." The words settled over Lenora like a second storm. "They'll come looking." She stared at Nako's face, at the way his jaw was clenched against pain even in his fevered state, and felt something shift in her chest. She'd destroyed her door to save his life. Now that same act might have signed her own death sentence. "How many?" she asked. He didn't answer. His eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. A tremor started in his legs, spreading upward through his massive frame. Another convulsion. Lenora grabbed his shoulders, trying to hold him steady, but it was like trying to restrain a falling tree. His back arched off the floor, every muscle locked tight. The wound in his side split open again, fresh blood soaking through the bandages she'd just applied. "No, no, no," she hissed, pressing hard against the wound. The convulsion passed, leaving him limp and gasping. His pulse was racing under her fingertips, far too fast. She'd seen this before with Marcus in his final hours, the body burning through everything it had left, using its last reserves to fight a battle it couldn't win. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. Lenora worked frantically, rewrapping the wound with the last of her clean cloth. When that ran out, she started tearing strips from her second dress, the one she'd been saving. The fabric was good quality, thick enough to hold pressure. She bound his ribs tight, trying to keep the wound closed through sheer force. His hand caught hers suddenly, his fingers cold despite the fever. "The rifle," he breathed. "By the door. You know how to use one?" "Yes. 3 men. Maybe 4 by now. They'll wait for the storm to pass. Then they'll track me here." His grip tightened. "You need to leave. Before dawn. Before they can see smoke from your fire." Lenora looked at the broken door, at the storm still raging beyond it. "I'd be dead in an hour out there. So would you. I'm already dead." His voice was matter of fact, resigned. "That saber went deeper than it looks. I can feel it. Something's broken inside. Not bleeding out fast enough to see, but it's there." He coughed, and this time blood flecked his lips. "Save yourself. I've put enough people in graves." "Stop talking like that." Lenora wiped the blood from his mouth with shaking fingers. "I didn't tear my door apart just to let you give up." Something almost like a smile crossed his face. "You're stubborn. You're too big for my door, and I fixed it. I can fix this too." The smile faded. Some things can't be fixed by wanting them to be. His eyes found hers, suddenly clear despite the fever. "My name is Nako. If those men come, if they ask who was here, you tell them you never learned my name. You tell them you found a stranger already dead on your porch. You tell them whatever keeps you breathing. I'm not going to. Promise me." His grip was surprisingly strong. "Promise me you'll lie to save your own life. I've seen too many people die for truth this week. Please don't add yourself to that count." Lenora opened her mouth to argue, but movement outside the broken door caught her attention. Not the wind. Something else. Something deliberate. She grabbed the rifle from where it leaned against the wall, her heart hammering. "I thought you said they'd wait for the storm to pass," she whispered. Nako's face went pale beneath the fever flush. "I thought they would." The sound came again, closer this time, footsteps crunching through snow, multiple sets. Lenora positioned herself between Nako and the door, raising the rifle to her shoulder. Her hands were steadier than she expected. The cabin had one entrance, and she'd already destroyed half of it to bring him inside. Now she'd have to defend it. A shadow fell across the blanket, covering the doorway. Then another. The footsteps stopped just outside. In the terrible silence that followed, Lenora could hear her own heartbeat, Nako's labored breathing, and the storm. Then a voice, muffled by the wind but clear enough. We tracked a wounded Apache to this location. We know he's inside. Lenora's finger found the trigger. Behind her, Nako tried to sit up and failed, his body too weak to respond. She was alone, facing armed men who'd already committed one massacre, with a door that wouldn't stop anyone and a man too big to hide. The voice came again. Send him out, and we'll leave you in peace. Lenora kept the rifle steady, aimed at the blanket-covered doorway. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. There's no one here but me. A pause, then a different voice, older, with an accent she couldn't place. Ma'am, we can see the blood trail leading right to your porch. We can see where you dragged something heavy through your door. Now we don't want trouble with you. We just want the Apache. I told you, there's no one here. The blanket shifted slightly. A hand appeared, pushing it aside just enough for her to see a face. Middle-aged man, weathered skin, eyes that had seen too much and felt too little about it. He wore a heavy coat, but underneath she could see the uniform. Cavalry. Not active duty from the look of it, but the clothes were real enough. My name is Carson, he said calmly. I've got 3 men with me. We're tracking a fugitive who killed 2 settlers and kidnapped a child. We followed him for 3 days. His tracks end at your cabin. The tracks end because there's no one alive at the end of them, Lenora lied. I found a man collapsed on my porch this morning, already dead. I couldn't move him, so I left him there. Storm probably buried him by now. Carson's expression didn't change. Mind if we check? Yes, I mind. It's the middle of a storm. I'm alone. And you're 4 armed men. You're not coming in my home. Behind her, Nako made a sound barely audible, but enough. Carson's eyes shifted, looking past her into the cabin. His face hardened. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time, politely, to step aside. Lenora's finger tightened on the trigger. And I'm going to tell you one more time, politely, that you're not welcome here. Carson sighed like a man who'd had this conversation before and was tired of it. The fugitive we're tracking is dangerous. He attacked a settlement, killed innocent people, and took a child. We recovered the boy 2 days ago from a church, half-starved and traumatized. The Apache told the priest some story about being a hero, but we know the truth. He's the one who set the fires. That's a lie, Nako's voice rasped from behind her. He'd managed to prop himself on one elbow, his face a mask of pain and rage. You're the ones who marked that settlement. You're the ones who did our job, Carson interrupted, his voice still calm. Removing hostile elements from territory marked for expansion. Those people were living on land that didn't belong to them. They were warned. They ignored the warnings. The truth of it hit Lenora like a physical blow. The red markers weren't random. They were official, government-sanctioned. These weren't rogue killers. They were following orders. The Apache here decided to interfere, Carson continued. Helped some of them escape. Took one of their children to spread his version of events. That makes him a criminal. That makes anyone helping him an accomplice. Lenora's hands were shaking now, but she kept the rifle up. Get off my property. Can't do that, ma'am. We've got a job to finish. Carson's hand moved to his belt, resting on the pistol there. You seem like a reasonable woman. Smart enough to know that protecting a criminal isn't worth dying for. Smart enough to know that cabin door of yours won't stop 4 armed men. He was right. The door was destroyed, barely hanging in place. Her walls were wood, thin enough that bullets would pass through easily. She had 1 rifle, maybe 6 shots if she'd counted right. They had 4 pistols at minimum, probably more weapons she couldn't see. Behind her, Nako tried to stand and couldn't. His breath came in sharp gasps. Blood had soaked through the fresh bandages, spreading across the floor. He was dying. Maybe not in the next minute, but soon. Very soon. Last chance, Carson said. Step aside or we come in anyway. Your choice how this ends. Lenora thought about Marcus, about the promises she'd made to a dead man, about the door she'd torn apart, about the size of the person she'd saved, and how that size meant nothing now. He was too big for her door, so she'd made the door bigger. Now these men were too dangerous for her to fight alone. She lowered the rifle slightly. Carson smiled. Then Lenora did something she'd learned from Marcus in their hardest times together. She made the choice that felt impossible and absolutely necessary. His name is Nako, she said clearly. And if you want him, you'll have to go through me first. Carson's smile disappeared. That's a mistake, ma'am. Maybe. Lenora raised the rifle back to her shoulder. But it's my mistake to make. Carson stepped back from the doorway. For a moment, Lenora thought he was retreating. Then she heard it. the sound of boots moving around the cabin's exterior, spreading out to flank her position. They were surrounding the structure. Her thin wooden wall suddenly felt like paper. "Nako," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the doorway. "Can you hold a weapon?" "Barely." His voice was weaker than before. "Lenora, you don't have to. I tore my door apart for you. I'm not stopping now." She risked a glance back at him. He'd managed to sit up against the wall, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. His face was gray beneath the fever flush. "There's a pistol in the drawer by the bed. Can you reach it?" He nodded, started moving. Every motion looked like agony, but he kept going. Good. Even wounded, even dying, his presence might make them hesitate, might buy her seconds she'd need. A voice called from the side of the cabin. "Mrs. Hartwell, is it?" Not Carson this time. Younger. "We checked the property records. Says this land belonged to Marcus Hartwell. That your late husband?" Lenora's stomach tightened. They'd done their research. Knew she was alone. Knew she was vulnerable. "Marcus died 6 months ago," she called back. "Fever took him. I've been alone since. Must be hard," the voice continued. False sympathy dripping from every word. Woman alone in the wilderness. Dangerous out here. All kinds of threats. Would be a shame if something happened to this nice cabin, especially with winter coming on. The threat was clear. Cooperate or lose everything. Her home, her safety, possibly her life. All for a man she'd met hours ago. A man who was dying despite everything she'd done. Behind her, Nako had reached the drawer. She heard it slide open, heard the click of metal against wood. He had the pistol. 2 weapons now. Still not enough, but better than 1. "I'm going to count to 10, Carson called out. "Then we're coming in. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard, but we're coming in either way. 1. Lenora's mind raced. 4 men, 4 sides of the cabin, thin walls. If they fired together, the cabin would become a death trap. She needed to change the equation somehow. 2. The fire. She looked at the hearth where flames still crackled despite the cold air coming through the broken door. An idea formed, desperate and dangerous. 3. "Nako," she said quickly. "Can you get to the door? The actual door, the part I broke?" He looked at the wooden frame pieces piled near the entrance. "Maybe." "Why?" 4. "Trust me." She moved toward the hearth, grabbing the iron poker. The blade was hot from resting against the stones. She shoved it deep into the fire, heating the tip until it glowed red. "When I say, you push those door pieces outside. All of them. As far as you can." 5. "That won't stop them," Nako gasped. "Not trying to stop them. Trying to make them think." She pulled the poker free. The tip glowed orange-red in the dim light. "They want to burn me out anyway. I'm just getting ahead of them." 6. Nako understood. His eyes met hers across the cabin, and something passed between them. Respect, maybe. Recognition of shared desperation. He started dragging himself toward the door, leaving a streak of blood behind him. 7. Lenora touched the poker to the edge of her table. The wood began to smoke immediately. She moved to the broken door frame, to the blanket stuffed in the gaps. The poker's heat made them smolder. 8. "Now," she told Nako. He shoved the broken door pieces through the opening. They tumbled out onto the porch, scattering. Lenora threw the blankets after them, watched them land on the wood. The embers caught. Smoke began to rise. 9! "Fire!" someone shouted outside. "The cabin's on fire!" Carson's voice angry now. "Hold position. It's a trick." But Lenora heard uncertainty in his tone. Heard footsteps moving, men repositioning. The fire was small, barely more than smoke, but it created confusion, created doubt, created the one thing she needed most. 10. The storm chose that moment to surge. Wind howling through the broken doorway, fanning the small flames into something larger. Real fire now, spreading across the dry wood of the porch. Not enough to threaten the cabin yet, but growing. The smoke thickened, blowing back inside, making her eyes water. Behind her, Nako collapsed against the wall, the pistol falling from his grip. His eyes were closed, his breathing barely visible. The effort of moving had cost him everything he had left. And outside, in the smoke and storm and confusion, Carson made his decision. "Move in. Now." The fire spread faster than Lenora expected. What started as a distraction became a genuine threat as the wind fed the flames, turning her porch into a wall of heat and smoke. She heard Carson shouting orders, heard boots retreating from the cabin's front. The smoke was too thick now, the heat too intense. They couldn't approach from that direction anymore. But they could still come from the sides, from the back. Lenora grabbed Nako under the arms, trying to drag him away from the door. He was dead weight, his body limp. When she pressed her fingers to his neck, his pulse was barely there, weak and irregular. The pool of blood beneath him had grown larger. He was running out of time measured in minutes, not hours. "Stay with me," she whispered, knowing he probably couldn't hear anymore. His eyes were closed, his breathing so shallow she had to watch carefully to see his chest move. A crash from the back wall. Someone was breaking through. Lenora raised the rifle, aimed at the sound. A section of wood splintered inward, and she fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make whoever was there think twice. She heard cursing, heard them pulling back. But she'd used one bullet. How many did she have left? 4? 5? Not enough. The front of the cabin was getting hotter. Smoke poured through the broken doorway, making her eyes water and her lungs burn. She'd created a barrier, but she'd also trapped herself. The fire wasn't going to stop just because she needed it to. It was going to keep burning until there was nothing left. Another crash, this time from the side wall. They were testing her, seeing how many places she could defend at once. The answer was not enough. She fired again, heard a grunt of pain. At least one shot had found its mark, but that meant she had even fewer bullets left. Lenora looked down at Nako. His face was peaceful now, the pain lines smoothed away. For a moment she thought he was already gone. Then his chest rose slightly, fell, still breathing, still fighting. Even now, even like this, he was too stubborn to quit. The fire reached the cabin's interior wall. Flames licked at the wood, hungry and growing. The heat was becoming unbearable. She had maybe 2 minutes before the whole structure became an oven. She could leave, could run out the back, take her chances with the men outside. They wanted Nako, not her. If she left him here, they might let her go. "I'm sorry," she said to him, or maybe to Marcus, or maybe to herself. Then she made her choice. She threw open the back wall's small window and fired blindly into the smoke outside. Heard shouting, used the confusion to grab Nako's arms again and drag him toward the opening. He was too big to fit through the window, but there was a place where the wall joined the floor, where age and weather had weakened the wood. She grabbed the axe still lying where she'd dropped it after destroying the door and swung at the weak point. The wood gave way. One more swing. 2. A gap appeared, low to the ground but wide enough. She dragged Nako through it, out into the snow. The storm hit them immediately, but it was better than the fire. Anything was better than burning alive. She pulled him as far from the cabin as her strength allowed, maybe 30 feet, before her arms gave out. Behind them, the cabin was fully engulfed now. The flames lit up the storm, turning the snow orange and red. She could see figures moving around it, Carson and his men, backing away from the heat. They hadn't seen her escape in the smoke and chaos. Lenora pressed her hand to Nako's chest one more time. The movement was gone. No rise. No fall. She waited, counting seconds that felt like hours. Nothing. His pulse had stopped. His eyes, when she opened them, were fixed and unseeing. He'd survived 3 days running from killers. Survived a cavalry saber through his ribs. Survived long enough to save a child and lead his pursuers away from that child's refuge. But he couldn't survive the last few hours in a cabin where a woman had torn apart her door trying to save him. Lenora closed his eyes gently. Around her the storm began to ease. Dawn was coming, gray and cold. In the growing light, she saw Carson spot her, saw him recognize Nako's stillness. He stared at the body for a long moment, then at the burning cabin, then at Lenora covered in blood and soot and exhaustion. He turned away, gestured to his men. They mounted horses she hadn't known were there, and rode into the fading storm without another word. The Apache was dead. The job was finished. A woman who'd lost her home wasn't worth any more trouble. Lenora stayed with Nako until the storm passed completely, until the fire burned itself out, leaving nothing but charred wood and memory. She buried him where the ground was softest, marked the place with stones, took the small beaded pouch with the child's tooth and kept it. Someday, she'd find that mission church. Someday, she'd tell that boy that someone had loved him enough to die leading killers away. But first, she'd build a new door, a bigger one this time, wide enough for anyone who needed shelter to pass through. If you want to hear another powerful frontier story of courage and sacrifice, click the video on your screen right now. And if these stories mean something to you, hit that subscribe button. There's more truth and heart where this came from.